Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan Maiden.
But what's more impressive to me about the
Chase Thornton.
Yeah, I mean, I got to get
Chris Dowhouse.
Get him, Chase.
And Adam
No,
LaRue.
not necessarily, but it's again the same.
Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate.
All right, well, we got to move on. Good spirited debates, but we got to talk about some of these wide receivers. Chris, you have Chris Olave, Chris to Chris here. You got him at wide receiver 16. That is the lowest amongst Chase and myself, who both have him as a top 12 option. So why are you not excited about the idea Chris Olave could be taking that jump this year and finishing right about where he was last year?
Well, that's not, he was top 22 last year, or top 20, I think he was last year, 19 maybe. But it wasn't something, the guy that I think he's going to be, these all of a sudden is going to make this huge jump. I think the offense will be better in general. Chris Olave had pretty decent numbers last year. I don't really see the numbers changing a whole lot. The guy was top, he was 25, I think, year before, 24, 19 last year. 5 touchdowns this past year, 40 touchdowns the year before. Is that going to all of a sudden increase? I don't know, possibly. There's a lot of other receivers on the board that I just think have more consistency, more potential, and guys I just like a lot more. I think Chris Olave is a guy that people like. They've been projecting him. They want him to kind of go off and keep waiting for that kind of happen. But I just see a guy who's been getting about 1,200 yards, a guy who gets you about 5-6 touchdowns. He only had one game last year over 15 points in half-point PPR. So, I mean, what ceiling we're looking at for a guy, I don't know. Ways to go look. And he had 8 games where he was in single digits in half-point PPR. So that's a pretty low side for receiver one. So I have a lot of questions about this guy that I'm not going to really wait that jump. I think I have him pretty fairly. I think he's going to get better than he was last year. Just don't see this guy all of a sudden being receiver one now.
Go ahead, Chase.
Well, I'm kind of a Chris Olave guy. I kind of have been. But I don't see where else they want to throw the ball in this offense outside of, we just talked about Kamara and Olave. With Juwan Johnson being hurt, he thinks he's going to start the season, but there's not a lot there to get excited about for me. And Foster Moreau, Taysom Hill, and Juwan Johnson at tight end. There's not a lot of competition for him. So I think he's still going to get those targets. Now, you made a good point. Like, okay, well, we've seen him already get, his 120, 130 targets and get 1,100 yards and 5-6 touchdowns. We've seen that, but we haven't seen that in Clint Kubiak's offense. And I think if we're going to get excited about the offensive scheme, then Chris Olave being the number one in that scheme, I think there are good things available for him. There are targets available, now that Michael Thomas is out of town. I like Rashid Shaheed as a player. I don't necessarily like him to cut into Olave's workload at any. A.T. Perry is nothing to get excited about. But listen, he caught 63% of his balls, last season that were thrown to him. And Derek Carr was a 68% passer. I think that there's more meat on the bone for Chris Olave in general. And there has been more meat on the bone for him in these last 2 years. And I think with this offense coming up, with Clint Kubiak's offense being installed, I think it bodes well for a good season for Chris Olave. So I'm willing to take a gamble on him right at that 1-2 turn in terms of the wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 turn. I'm willing to take the gamble on him there.
Yeah, Chase, you kind of laid it out there. It's a system. Yeah, it's the system and it's opportunity. Like you said, we're going to get excited about Alvin Kamara, about with the system that he's in and how that could play.
5 last year by points per game.
Point. Yeah. Okay. One of these times you're going to actually let me talk when it's my turn to talk. But when Chris Olave gets his chance, when he goes 138 targets last season, and he's third in unrealized air yards down the field and fourth in deep ball targets, and you add all that up, the metrics, he has 1.71 target separation above average last year, and now you add in Kubiak, who when he was the offensive play caller, he had Justin Jefferson go for 1,600 yards and 10 touchdowns in 2021 season, which is his second year. He had Brandon Ayuk be the most efficient wide receiver last season, and Chris Olave did improve from his rookie year to his sophomore year. Guess what? It all adds up to Chris Olave as a target monster and a much better offensive scheme. Having a year rapport, Derek Carr hopefully helps with some of the issues they had deep down the field. But this all adds up to a third-year breakout for Chris Olave. All right. So moving, I wasn't sure if there's going to be a rebuttal after that or not. So moving on now, we do have Drake London. Chase, we're all pretty much in the same range when it comes to Drake London. Wide receiver 11. You got him at 12. Chris, you got him down at wide receiver. I got to say down, but wide receiver 14. You're not down on him at all. I think we're all looking at this. We talked about a little bit of Kirk Cousins. Chase, you got Drake London top 12. Why do you just think he makes the leap up? What's his pathway besides Kirk Cousins? Besides the scheme that we talked about?
That's basically it. I mean, you brought it up a little bit, earlier too about the idea that the Cousins and Robinson and being there, and that we all think that they've had all of their offensive weapons, Pitts, Robinson, London, the list goes on, that we all think that they all have the talent to be what we've all assumed that they could be, but they've been held back by the offense that they're in. I don't think they're going to be held back anymore. I think Zach Robinson, like I said, he has said they are going to throw the living hell out of the ball this year. They want to, even with Bijan Robinson there and Tyler Algier, that dynamic backfield that they have. But the Zach Robinson and Cousins factors, this team was only 25th in pass attempts last season. I think there's no way they finish in the bottom half of the league in pass attempts this year with Kirk Cousins and with Zach Robinson there now. And by the way, Drake London only had 2 scores last season. I think that he regresses to the mean in a big way that way. So I like Drake London to make that kind of leap. It's a big leap compared to what he was last year and compared to where he has scored, but I like him to make that leap because I think he is a true alpha. I like Darnell Mooney. Darnell Mooney is a number 3 wide receiver in all honesty, and he will function essentially as such with Kyle Pitts around, I believe. So Drake London is the alpha there, and I like him to eat as such.
Yeah, this is fantasy football. We got to project out ahead so we can be out ahead for these guys for everybody else. Let's dive into Mike Evans. Chris, you're the highest on Mike Evans. You got him at 11, top 12 guys. So basically, you're saying you think Mike Evans can replicate what he did last season. Why are you that confident despite the transition?
Past 3 seasons is more I'm confident in Mike Evans overall. A guy who, was 8, I believe, in 2021, half-point PPR, 16 the next year, and then last year, as you talked about, the number of top 5 guy. A guy who is just, doesn't really have a change in targets, Dan. It was about 125 targets. Mike Evans does what he does. He gets the targets, he scores touchdowns, and he's going to be getting over 1,000 yards for sure. That's a guarantee for 10 straight years. Yep. And the one thing that can fluctuate with the touchdowns, but we saw last year where we got back to where it made no sense, where we actually looked for Mike Evans in the red zone versus not looking for Mike Evans. That Tom Brady, Mike Evans connection, I will never understand what happened there. But outside of that, usually Mike Evans is the alpha in that passing attack, especially in the red zone. I see no reason that's going to change this year. This offense might not be quite as potent, but we've seen these offenses, feed that X receiver quite well. So I think Mike Evans consistently is once again the most targeted receiver for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. A guy who can continue to be the guy used down the field, a guy who can continue to use the red zone, and a guy that Baker Mayfield can see. So put all the things together, I see another top 10 finish opportunity for Mike Evans. And this guy gets stepped on every year, by the way.
He does. He does. We do usually have him as a mid-level wide receiver too, and he usually does perform better than that. I don't disagree with anything you're saying except for, and this is why I got him at wide receiver 17. I don't think that the touchdown red zone targets disappear, but the touchdown rate was 9.5%, which even for him was by far the best in his career. I think it's going to be a little bit difficult for him to be that efficient, and his touchdowns from year to year have been wide in their variance, and he had 13 last season. So if you come back down to about 8, which I think is a fair number for Mike Evans, with the rest of his numbers, it kind of lands him in that mid-level wide receiver 2 tier, which is why I'm a little bit lower on him. But yeah, Mike Evans, one of the great things about him is he's got one of the highest floors you can possibly take year in and year out, no matter what the situation is. This guy, we might be a little bit more concerned about, though, being able to bounce back. Chris Godwin, rough year last year, most because of touchdowns, though. I mean, it wasn't really because of targets. So it wasn't necessarily because of yards. It was just because he wasn't finding the end zone. But Chase, you got him at 37. So why are we still treating Chris Godwin as a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4?
Because that's kind of what he is. I mean, if you want to point back to last season again, wide receiver 31 overall, but on a points per game basis, wide receiver 38. I don't see him necessarily, I don't see this passing game taking a giant step forward. We kind of already talked about that with our Baker Mayfield thoughts. There is reason to maybe be a little optimistic on Chris Godwin. he's going to get to play a little bit more out of the slot where he likes to play out of in this. They're going to do more motion in this offense than they've done in the past. They want to bring that dynamic in there. They want to dictate the coverages that Chris Godwin sees, that Mike Evans sees, that everybody on the field sees under Liam Cohen. And so I do have a little bit of optimism for Chris Godwin that he could outperform where I have him currently and where people are taking him currently. We've seen him be, a good dynamic receiver in the past. And if he gets back to what he wants to be doing, playing out of the slot where he's comfortable, he could definitely find his way up to
top 20 more, 2022.
Exactly. Like we've seen it he has that ability. He's not going to score 2 touchdowns again. Like I said, with Drake London, I think there's some regression to the mean there. So there's reason to be cautiously optimistic for Chris Godwin, but not to the point that I'm going to rank him any higher than a wide receiver 3-4 right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he's in position to get more volume than he had last year. He actually had a 24% target share.
But the volume he does get might be better, might be more effective.
Yeah. It might be. Well, yeah, and I was going to lay out there for you is that he was 76 in ADOT. I expect that to rise back up to his normal level next season. It's not usually that inefficient. He only had 2 games over 100 yards. Where Chris Godwin showed you what I think is most impressive, because this is a guy who was not 100% healthy throughout the year. He was second in route win rate. He was still getting open. He was still winning his routes despite all of that. So I do think there's reason to think there can be some hope for Godwin to bounce back. That's why I don't want him to be completely off of people's boards. I think he should be considered as that lower end wide receiver 3. I just don't expect too many big games, despite some of the things that we might be hoping for.
No, but if you can combine that win rate with, like I said, dictating the coverages that he sees now to a much greater extent than they had before, yeah, there's possibility.
I think part of that too is going to be Trey Palmer, Jalen McMillan, because I think if McMillan's playing, I don't know how much Chris Godwin's lining up in the slot. If it's Palmer, I tend to
they're moving Godwin to the slot. They talked about that this offseason.
Yeah, that's been a big deal. He himself has given some interviews where he has stated how stoked he is because he likes playing there out of the slot.
I think they're going to be more versatile with him than he was last season, regardless. Whether he's primarily the slot receiver, again, I do think is going to come back to, is it going to be Palmer or McMillan as that typical starting third receiver? If it's McMillan, they ain't pushing him outside. Then that doesn't mean they still don't rotate Godwin in and out. They did it with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua within that offense all the time. And so it just kind of depends on how they're going to approach that, how often it will truly be. Chris, this is interesting. So you're highest on Deontay Johnson, despite him not being an improvement in your eyes.
No, I didn't say it wasn't an improvement. This is what I said. The offense around them, I don't think it's much different. I think he could do what Adam Thielen did last year. Adam Thielen was a very solid receiver, for this Tampa Bay team, or that's maybe Carolina team. People kind of forgot about Adam Thielen, what he could do. I think people forgot what Deontay Johnson could do. The guy can get open and catch a lot of volume for a guy who can't throw the ball down the field very consistently. So I think Deontay Johnson has one of the best, separation rates over the last decade. Deontay Johnson is one of those guys that constantly gets open, constantly can be able to beat guys. And so I think you're going to see a lot of things that Adam Thielen was able to do last year. Deontay Johnson can repeat for him this year.
And he's free in drafts. Nobody wants him. He's going way down.
Yeah,
he's going way lower than what any of us have him ranked. So yeah.
And I think they're
his ADP's 38. His ADP's 38. Yeah, Canales, he's consolidated to his top targets. That's literally what he's been used to doing. I don't see why that wouldn't continue here. So Deontay Johnson, look, first of all, Adam Thielen, I think, is toast. I think he showed up to the second half of last year. It was like he couldn't even keep up with the 5-yard routes that he was running.
He wore out
with the volume he could get. And Johnson's been someone over the past 3 years. He's getting between 25-27% target share. That usually gives you a floor of a high-end wide receiver 3. Just that kind of level of volume alone. And last season, wide receiver 31 on a points per game basis, despite suffering the hamstring injury, with Kenny Pickett predominantly as his quarterback. So I think he can sustain Bryce Young, even if he's not any better than Kenny Pickett, then still be a wide receiver.
And with no arm, Mason Rudolph and everything else, he's got played his entire career.